Well, as we predicted in the previous episode, Ukraine is unilaterally declaring a 30-day ceasefire and demanding the same from dictator Putin. In particular, Ukraine, together with European countries and the United States of America, agreed to begin a full and unconditional ceasefire starting Monday, the 12th of May. It should last for at least 30 days. This was announced by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, at a press conference following the meeting with the so-called Coalition of the Willing, here. I remind you that today, on May 10th, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, arrived in Kiev. And all this time, the American President, Donald Trump, was on the phone. And yesterday, in one of the episodes, I specifically left it here so that you could go back and watch it. We were just discussing how European countries and the United States of America, together with Ukraine, are preparing a kind of deadline for the dictator Putin, if you will, an ultimatum. Either he agrees to a ceasefire for 30 days, this is already an ultimatum, or a strike will be carried out against his country. For now, of course, it's a sanctions strike, but nevertheless, both Europe and the United States of America have prepared a rather powerful sanctions blow. Moreover, what's very important is that European officials already, so in the form of insider information, they state that if Putin does not agree to this 30-day ceasefire, then Ukraine will receive much more weaponry than it is receiving now. That is, arms deliveries will be stepped up. And as you know, Germany has even classified future arms deliveries in order to create so-called strategic ambiguity, so that Putin has no idea at all what exactly is being supplied to the armed forces of Ukraine. In the Kremlin, they're already shouting that this is outrageous, disgraceful. How can anyone even issue ultimatums to the dictator Putin? But such a reaction shows that they're panicking over there right now and weighing all the pros and cons. Regarding whether to agree to a 30-day ceasefire starting from Monday, Ukraine, European allies and the United States have made it clear it must begin already on Monday, the 12th of May. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is May 10th. Let's discuss all the pitfalls and all the details of this decision together with you in this episode. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and be sure to leave your comments, in order for the algorithms could promote this episode and as many people as possible could see it. If you want to support this channel financially, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video, or by using the quick response code on your screens. Also, subscribe to the channel. There you'll find up-to-date news so you don't miss out and don't have to wait for episodes on. You can subscribe to the channel and there you can follow all the most relevant and important world news. So let's get started. Ukraine, together with European countries and, very importantly, the United States of America, has agreed to begin a full and unconditional ceasefire starting Monday, the 12th of May. It is supposed to last for at least 30 days. President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced this at a press conference after meeting with the coalition, which was open to all who wanted to attend. Next, I quote Zelensky. "Together we demand this from Russia. We know that the United States of America supports us in this. What? An unconditional ceasefire means without any conditions. Any attempt to put forward any conditions is evidence of an intention to prolong the war and disrupt diplomacy. The ceasefire must be comprehensive in the air, at sea, and on land." In addition, Zelensky emphasized that, in coordination with the United States of America, it is quite possible to ensure monitoring of the ceasefire. 30 days of ceasefire, according to Zelensky, will give a real chance to diplomacy. Next, there is another quote from Zelensky. "During this time, the work will be focused on defining the security, political and humanitarian foundations of peace. We welcome the fact that the demands for a ceasefire and a transition to substantive diplomacy are supported by everyone, not only the countries of Europe, but also the United States, who were the first to propose this." This is a very important point, especially against the backdrop of Donald Trump already rather nervously declaring that he is already annoyed by the dictator. Putin, who clearly has no intention of ending the war, is obviously deceiving the American president and rejecting all proposals, coming up with some conditions of his own. As Peskov, Putin's press secretary, said yesterday, they supposedly already agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. But they have a whole list of conditions that still need to be discussed for several months, and then maybe they will move toward a ceasefire. Europe, the United States and Ukraine are currently refusing in an ultimatum-like manner. Starting from May 12th, we will begin a ceasefire and observe your behavior. Are you ready for this ceasefire without any conditions or not? If you're not ready, then there will be further sanctions, but we will get to that. President of France, Emmanuel Macron, in turn stated that although the main role in monitoring should be played by the United States, all partners will participate in this. This is also an important point. Why? Because Macron directly states that Europe and the United States are ready to monitor the ceasefire regime. And why is this important? Because a few weeks ago, let me remind you, there were such suggestions from the Americans like, let's involve some third countries, so-called neutral ones, who would monitor the ceasefire regime together with Ukrainians and Russians. That is, hypothetically speaking, let's say there are Ukrainian troops, Russian troops, and in addition some, I don't know, Chinese or Turkish, Brazilian or Middle Eastern forces. So together, they would have to somehow monitor the ceasefire regime along the line of contact. The United States and Europe are distancing themselves from this situation. Russians said, oh, that's a great idea, but we'll choose ourselves who this third party will be. Now patience has run out and Macron says, listen, Europeans and Americans, if you don't like it, goodbye. We are imposing sanctions, supplying weapons to Ukraine, and from now on everything will be decided on the battlefield. Next, I will quote Macron. In case of a violation, we have reached an agreement to impose large-scale sanctions against the Russian Federation. This issue will be prepared and coordinated by the Americans and Europeans. Well, let me also give a couple of quotes that were mentioned today. In particular, Macron stated that the participants of the coalition of the willing will demand a 30-day ceasefire, and the main role in monitoring will be played by the Americans. In case of violations, of course, there will be sanctions from Europe and from America. Keir Starmer stated that despite numerous proposals and appeals, he still wants some conditions, and instead of a ceasefire, he organized a military parade. This refers to the dictator Putin. If Putin is seriously thinking about peace, right now is the chance to demonstrate it. The United Kingdom and the United States will increase military aid to Ukraine if Putin refuses to cease fire. Interestingly, Russia reacted brazenly in its usual manner to the coalition's set firm deadlines for a ceasefire. At the same time, Moscow insists that it supposedly isn't afraid of any sanctions. Today, that's Putin's line. The press secretary of the Russian dictator, Dmitry Peskov, made the following statement, quote, "We've already gotten used to sanctions. We already even imagine what we will do after these sanctions are announced, how we will minimize their consequences and so on. We've learned this, so trying to scare us with these sanctions is pointless." At the same time, the first to respond to the ultimatum of the coalition of the willing, or the coalition of the resolute, or as I call them, the coalition of guarantors, was the deputy head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev. On his account on the social network X, Dmitry Medvedev lashed out with insults at the European leaders who participated in the meeting in Kyiv. Next I will quote verbatim the main alcoholic of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev. Macron, Merz, Starmer and Tusk were set to discuss peace in Kiev, but are threatening Russia instead. Either a ceasefire to give the Banderite hordes a break or new sanctions. Do you think this is reasonable? Well, shove those peace plans up your pangender asses. Well, that's the language Russian officials use to communicate. You know, I've been wondering for a long time, why do Russians... Look, pay attention, all the insults come down to genitals or the anus. I don't understand. I mean, these are points of view from psychology. If there's anyone among the viewers who can explain this, please write in the comments why they have such an attraction specifically to this. All their insults are focused specifically on this area of the human body. For me, that's some kind of paradox. Of course, there is an explanation for this, but if you know it, please write it in the comments. But let's move on. In particular, right after this announcement, it became known that Ukraine and all its allies had simultaneously held negotiations with the American President Donald Trump. This is very, very important because this is in fact complete coordination, as we discussed with you yesterday, of efforts between Europe and the United States of America. This is actually a sharp turnaround in Washington's position. Remember, just a couple of months ago, we said that Europe wasn't needed in these negotiations and that we would reach an agreement with the Russians on our own. And now the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Sybiga, says the following. After the meeting of the coalition of the willing in Kyiv, all 5 leaders, Volodymyr Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Donald Tusk, and Kurt Tarmer had a productive phone conversation with United States President Donald Trump about peace efforts. Ukraine and all its allies are ready for a complete unconditional ceasefire on land, in the air, and at sea for at least 30 days, starting as early as Monday. Well, according to him, if Russia agrees and effective monitoring is ensured, a prolonged ceasefire and trust-building measures could pave the way for peace negotiations. But, of course, the Europeans made it clear what would happen if Putin does not agree to this ceasefire starting Monday. In particular, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, stated the following: "We are here to stand for a just and lasting peace that Ukraine deserves." It's been almost 2 months since Ukraine agreed to the idea of a 30-day ceasefire. During this time, Russia has launched one of the most devastating attacks against civilians, destroying lives, homes, and families. This is exactly what Russia is offering instead of peace, along with attempts to confuse people with delays and by not responding to the ceasefire proposal. That is why we are here, together with the United States, addressing Putin openly. If you are seriously thinking about peace, now is your chance to demonstrate it. We are talking, I emphasize, about an unconditional 30-day ceasefire with immediate commencement of negotiations after the ceasefire is achieved, without additional conditions and without delays. Putin demands conditions, rejecting a ceasefire in favor of a military parade. He is once again challenging us. He refuses, despite our numerous appeals and despite appeals from Ukraine. If Putin refuses to cease fire, then the United Kingdom and the United States will increase military aid to Ukraine. Further, I quote, "If Putin does not return to the path of peace, we will respond. Together with President Trump, we will strengthen our support for Ukraine's defense capabilities to force Russia to come to the negotiating table." Now that's a position. And next we get some interesting information from Germany. Here's what happened. After more than 3 years of full-scale war and such broad transparency, the new government of Germany decided to keep its arms supplies to Ukraine secret. The federal government will significantly reduce and classify all information about future arms deliveries to Ukraine. This step is reportedly not meant to provide the aggressor in the Ukraine war a military advantage. The reduction of public discussions about arms deliveries is considered part of the tactics of waging war. Well, and it is now emphasized that in fact this may mean that Friedrich Merz has nevertheless decided to supply Taurus missiles to Ukraine. The new government is making a sharp turn and is once again classifying arms deliveries in order to achieve so-called strategic ambiguity, to create uncertainty and to conceal its actions from the adversary. At the same time, the secrecy also applies to the Taurus missiles. The change in course of the federal government also affects the painful open question of the Ukrainian policy of the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. And as Der Spiegel writes today, during the election campaign, Merz emphasized that he was ready to supply, but only in coordination with alliance partners who have already delivered such missiles or possess them in Europe. That's the United Kingdom and France, and they are not against it. The President of France recently responded to a journalist's question about a possible delivery of Taurus missiles from Germany, saying that such topics will no longer be discussed publicly. As Macron stated, "We will be transparent with the Ukrainians. We will meet their needs, but we will talk about it as little as possible. During his Kiev visit, Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz threatened dictator Putin with a tough response. Next is his quote, "We call for a 30-day ceasefire so that during this time it will be possible to prepare peace negotiations." Now the ball is in Putin's court and he must respond to this proposal. In case of refusal, there will be a serious tightening of sanctions and large-scale support for Ukraine, political, financial, and military. This can already be called a truly significant breakthrough. Moreover, the coalition of the Resolute, as Macron stated today, is working daily with partners on a proposal to send a military contingent to Ukraine. According to the French leader, support for the Ukrainian army will continue in the future, because a strong army is the best guarantee of security. Therefore, as Macron added, the Allies will need to ensure proper funding for military assistance to Ukraine. Quote, "Lasting peace requires real international security guarantees. Therefore, we are strengthening our coalition, preparing proposals for the formation of a contingent in accordance with the March proposals. This work with partners is ongoing daily. Well, according to Macron, a possible 30-day ceasefire should be used to fulfill all the necessary parameters to support such a peace. And I quote, "We are absolutely ready for this. We have taken on this commitment and we will fulfill it," says Macron. In addition, today both Macron and Keir Starmer threatened Russia with new sanctions. And in fact, they said that we completely reject any conditions put forward by the dictator. Putin says, from his side, that either you need to agree to a ceasefire and demonstrate that you want peace, or you don't agree. And then sanctions against Russia and increased military aid for Ukraine. Well, there is already a reaction from the United States of America to this proposal. Today, Donald Trump's special representative in Ukraine, Kit Kellogg, stated that a complete ceasefire for 30 days will mark the beginning of the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Quote, "A comprehensive, that is air, ground, sea and infrastructure ceasefire for 30 days will mark the beginning of the process of ending the largest and longest war in Europe since World War II. He noted that United States President Donald Trump has repeatedly stated, "Stop the killing immediately." And now Trump's position has changed, assures Ned Kit Kellogg. So friends, we are waiting for Monday and we will see how Russia will behave. And, which is very important, now I have great hope that there will be sanctions and that they will actually be tightened. Plus, military aid for Ukraine will be increased. Why? Because before these were scattered positions, first from Great Britain and France, and on the other side from the United States of America. Then Germany joined Great Britain and France, and now Poland is joining as well. And so we end up with this kind of coalition of decisive countries. But what is important right now? What's important is that now this coalition is fully coordinating its actions with Washington, meaning Washington is now fully in the game. Europe and Washington are now aligned in their stance to continue supporting and arming the Ukrainian armed forces instead of pursuing immediate negotiations with Russia. This whole story is over now. So today it seemed that this story has ended and the Americans together with the Europeans are really ready to put pressure on Russia. That's why I'm putting an ellipsis here. Share your opinion and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, click the bell and don't forget to like.